Dang, I wish my photos looked like that.
Being able to look at a photo and know how to recreate a similar look is a really important editing skill. When you can look at a photo and instantly break down everything that's happening in that image, you can literally create any look that you want. I'm gonna break down my entire process for how I can take an image and virtually recreate any look. For example, I was able to take this image and make it look like it was a scene from the movie No Time to Die, or this image and make it look like it came straight from the movie Dune. All right, let's get started. So because we're trying to replicate a look from another photographer or cinematographer, we need to first grab a reference image. In a recent video that I put out, I talked a lot about where you can find reference images, so I'm not really going to touch on that in this video, but if you would like to go and see that video, I'll leave the links below. So when we're thinking about choosing a reference image, it works best if that environment from the reference image resembles the environment that our photo is taken in. This doesn't always have to be the case, but it can be really helpful when you're just starting out to have a similar base to start off with, and then you can try and copy within those same environments. This is going to save you a whole lot of headaches and head scratching when you're just starting out and trying to figure things out. But with that being said, I don't want you to think that you can't stretch your images, because realistically you really can. For example, I took this photo and made it look like it was a night scene. By no means is it perfect because obviously it was daytime, but you can see really what's possible. Okay, so if we want to copy the look of an image, we need to break down that image by its highlights, midtones, and shadows. We need to look at these three elements in terms of lighting and color. Okay, so for this video, I'm going to be using a reference image from one of my favorite photographers, John Hebert. Let's look at John's image and check out the lighting. Okay, so first thing that we'll notice is that John's highlights are really controlled. You'll notice that all great photographers do this within their images. That doesn't mean that you can't have blown out highlights where you can't see the sky, because that is a look of its own, but it means that there isn't a sting to those highlights. Let's look at this other image from John. Even though he chose to eliminate the sky by having those brighter highlights, it isn't overdone. We could say that his highlights are controlled. The way that we can control our highlights so that it's not abrasive to our eye is with the white slider in the basics tab. When you pull those whites down, it flattens out the highlights and removes the sting. Watch what happens when the whites are brought up on this image. Can you see the difference? The original image that John had produced is a lot more pleasing to the eye, where the other one is a little bit too strong for the eye. This is really important to think about when you're editing your own photos. Okay, next let's look at the midtones. When we think of the midtones, that's the space between the highlights and the shadows. So in this image, that'd be things like the hill, parts of the rider, and parts of the bike, and even a little bit into the sky. When we go to the basics tab in Lightroom, you'll notice that there isn't a slider that says midtones, so the slider that's going to control those midtones is mainly going to be those shadows. Whether you want to keep a lot of those midtone details or you want to crush them to have that bit of a silhouetted look, that is completely up to you. But if we're trying to achieve this reference image from John, he keeps a lot of his midtone detail, and I really like that myself. So we're gonna go and stick with that. Lastly, the shadows in an image will be affected mainly with the contrast slider, the shadow slider, and the black slider. It's kind of like a bit of a dance between the three of them, where you adjust one and then you have to go back and adjust the other one. Just like with those midtones though, it is completely up to you on how much detail you leave within those shadows. I personally like to leave a little bit more shadow detail just because I feel like it gives a little bit more context to the overall environment. For example, if this shot was for a motorcycle company, then it's good to keep those shadow details because you'll be able to see more of the motorcycle. I know it sounds obvious, but for those that are still learning, it's really good things to think about. Now that we know how to affect the lighting in our image and how others do it, we need to look at the color aspect. In Lightroom, there's a color grading tab that allows you to adjust your highlights, midtones, and shadows. This is honestly where I do 99% of my adjustments when it comes to color grades. The process figuring out what colors photographers are pushing in their image is actually pretty simple. When you have that photo with the style that you want to recreate, look at the highlights and ask yourself, what is the most dominant color in the brighter parts of this photo? The same can be done for the shadows, but you might have to zoom in a little bit because sometimes it can be really hard to pick up exactly what that color is in those shadows. The midtones, on the other hand, are not as easy to pick out. Most likely, if somebody's pushing a color grade based off of complementary colors, they'll likely just enhance the highlight color or the shadow color. Then your midtones will follow after your highlights or your shadows depending on the emotion that you're trying to portray. Now, what I just mentioned about the midtones isn't a scientific proven fact, but it's just what I've seen to be true throughout the past 6 years of doing editing. So you might have just heard me mention complementary colors. This might be a concept that you're familiar with because most likely you were taught it as a kid in public school. The easiest way that I can break this down for what it means to your photography is if we look at a color wheel and you're trying to push an orange and teal look, orange and teal are opposite on the color spectrum, meaning that they're complementary to each other. I use this concept a ton when I'm doing photo editing. For example, my rider was wearing teal in this warm, sunny environment, so all I needed to do from the original was basically just shift the hue hue of that warm sun tone more towards that orange. And now those two colors would perfectly complement each other because they were completely opposite on the color spectrum. I bring this up because you'll notice that a lot of your favorite photographers are actually using complementary colors all the time. And now that you're familiar with this concept and that other photographers are doing it, you can pick up on this way easier. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go back to this photo with John. Balancing the blacks in your image is really important. Obviously, there's gonna be times where this isn't applicable, but when you have those true blacks within your final image, it gives the overall appearance that your environment looked like that in real life. Let's say the blacks in your image are polluted with like this red hue, the whole entire image is gonna look off. So that's where the shadow wheel can really help to balance out those blacks. Most times to balance out those blacks, you're gonna be pushing the shadow slider completely opposite from the highlights or the midtones. The color grading wheels are a really great tool to start shaping your image fast and start achieving those looks. But I do have to say that the color grading tab isn't gonna be the only tool that you're gonna use to recreate a look. You'll also need to utilize the HSL and the color tab to really start dialing in those specific colors. These three tools combined will really help you craft your image the way that you want. But for this image specifically, it would have been really easy for John to create that nice orange and teal look because the sun was already pushing that really warm golden glow and then the sky was already blue. So then what he would have done is change the hues, the color, and then go into the color grading tab and boost some of those warm highlight tones. So before we even go to look for a reference image, I would encourage you to look at your own image and say, what is the most dominant complementary colors that I could push within this photo? And then go and look for a similar image that could push kind of similar color tones. I believe that when you look at your own raw images with these things in mind, it will really help you get to your end goal a lot faster. I know that this was a lot to digest, so let's do a quick recap. You can quickly analyze an image based off of its highlights, midtones, and shadows. First, it's good to look at how the photographer or cinematographer is handling their lighting. And then second, you can go into seeing what is the most dominant colors within that image. Once you can determine those things, then you can start applying that into your own photos. If you got value from this video, consider subscribing. And if you're looking to start your own action sports photography journey, I think that you'll really like this video. All right, I'll catch you over there. Peace.